So, welcome to the self-reflection series. It is really a call on people across the world to look beyond the surface level of feelings, politics, beliefs, religion, and to really dig deeper. It's about having a constant level of introspection, really looking within oneself and awareness around one's own personal growth and how we interact with others collectively. Self-reflection is a catalyst of what can truly revolutionize your life if you desire to be in a constant state of transformation, recognizing that it's not so much about the destination, but instead the journey in which you choose. So today, we have Sidlali joining in on some self-reflection, and in particular, how not knowing your history and culture can affect your self-identity. So, Sidlali is a historian, author, a poet, an activist who does public speaking, poetry readings, and creates content that helps inspire and empower our community. She graduated with a BA, receiving the highest honors in 2016. In 2018, she won Best Oral Presentation for Thesis Summary. And the following year, she graduated with her MA from CSULA. So both degrees are in history, focusing on Mexican or Indigenous history, and works with various collectives to further Indigenous knowledge. She has over 20 years in this fight to radicalize and decolonize her communities. She uses social media as a platform to express her views as an unapologetic brown woman known as Mexican, who will go above and beyond to teach, share, and celebrate her identity, history, and heritage. And a quote that she lives by is, "When you know better, you do better," which I love. Yes, yes. So I also want to include that her self-published poetry book, Obsidian Blades, and her MA thesis will be linked in the description below. So, Sidlali, thank you so much for joining me today in the self-reflection series.
Thank you, Angela. I'm really grateful for you sharing space with me. I'm really excited about having this discussion, much needed in our communities. Thank you.
Yes, definitely, definitely. So I really am just curious to know, like, what really influenced your decision to be a historian?
Whew, okay, so I didn't plan on going to college. In high school, I would ditch all the time. I didn't take myself seriously until at age 15, I came across an organization at my school that was about indigenous history, decolonization. So that transformed me. I started college as an anthropology major. Then I went over to journalism. Then I went over to archaeology. But as a historian, it was a Japanese historian, right? US history, who really inspired me.
Wow.
He was talking about, indigenous genocide, African genocide. He was talking about, lies my teacher told me, like a really decolonial approach to US history. And I was like, I could not believe he was teaching this. This was at East LA College in Monterey Park in California. And I was like, if he could do this, I could do this. Like, I had no idea that you can actually teach the truth, in such a powerful and open way. And so right away I changed my major. And to me, I want to, I'm still applying to be a professor. But I was like, this is an opportunity for me to disrupt the white supremacist narrative of the way my history has been told, and I felt like very empowered. I felt like I want to teach in predominantly Black and brown colleges. That's where I want to focus my attention. And I feel that as a historian, I love, like, to me, I've always liked knowing where things come from, why things are a certain way. And I'm obsessed with receipts. Like, anytime someone has something to say to me, I'm like, where's your receipt, right? Let me see that. Because, there's so much BS out there, and there's so much misinformation. So I'm big on, like, where are our sources coming from? Who's creating these sources? Who's telling these stories? What is the motive? Like, I'm like an investigator, when it comes to how people are telling our stories. And
Yeah.
so I figured, you know what better way than to get in there, and really disrupt and occupy this space, and take it back, for our communities. So that's what inspired me. That's what inspired me. And to this day, I keep researching. I keep finding things. I keep sharing on YouTube. So I'm very passionate about that. So I think it's a perfect fit for what I like to do.
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting that, like, as you said, it was someone that, like, you weren't necessarily expecting it to come from. Like, it was someone that was Japanese that was so open about all these different levels of truth and history and culture and identity. And I think that just goes to show that it really doesn't, like, you can't focus so much on the messenger, but you have to focus on the message that is
Mhm.
being said. And if you kind of block that mindset of, like, oh, this person is this kind of race, then you may not receive the message that you are supposed to, embody, and then, go on to become a historian.
Yeah, yeah, you know what? And it's interesting because I have to say, like, the Chicano Studies department at my school, I was very, very disappointed with, which goes to show what you're saying, that sometimes the people that we expect are going to be the truth tellers, are going to be the ones. I was getting the opposite education with Chicano Studies, which is why I was like, I'm not, they're very complacent, very assimilationist. They were pushing a lot of like white supremacist agendas. And I was just like, wait a second, I have this Japanese professor, right? He's a Vietnam vet,
Wow.
breaking it down, right? And then I have a Chicano studies professor who's talking about, well, he never mentioned genocide of indigenous people, like nothing. It was just like, oh, that's just what happened and blah, blah, blah. But yet, like you're saying, this Japanese professor completely, I mean, I'm in contact with him to this day. He's still the same. Like he's unapologetic, and it's just powerful. Like you're saying, we have to appreciate knowledge where it comes from, whoever it comes through. Like we're supposed to receive that message. Absolutely.
How long have you been doing this work?
um 23 years. This July it would be 23 years. Yes. I started at 15 or so, and now I'm in my late 30s. So it's crazy. I still feel like I'm, 15, 16. Like I still feel connected to the youth, and that's why I speak to a lot of youth, because I just feel like a part of me is always really sensitive to youth and what their experiences are, because that's where a lot of my transformation began.
And I really love that. I think that there's so much that you could have just learned over time. It's been 2 decades now of you doing this work, right? So how much do you believe, like, knowing your ancestors, knowing, your history really dictates that quality of life over time, from the first time that you really started speaking up about it to, like, now? How much do you believe that really matters?
I think no matter what passion you have in life, no matter what dream you have, having a clear sense of who you are is powerful. It transforms you. Like, for example, when I was in high school, I wasn't in bad things, but I didn't care about history. I could care less about anything. I didn't know, right? But I consider myself a feminist, a vegan, a punk rocker. Like I was into all these things. But it wasn't until I started learning my history that I was like, how is anyone going to take me serious if I'm not showing up to class? I'm not even doing the work, you
Mm.
know? And once I started learning, I was like, I need to take myself serious because I matter, right? And I'm a first generation Mexicana, so I didn't have people in my family or my mom to say, are you going to college? Like, what are you going to do? Most of the my siblings, most of my cousins had already had kids by the time they were 16. So I didn't have an example of like, what are you going to do with your life? I'm here for you. I believe in you. Like none of that was part of my growing up. So learning about your history and learning about, the great civilizations and how it's been systematically repressed from us, it was very empowering, because I felt like, you know what, this is something that needs to be known. This is something that needs to be part of US textbooks. And it gave me a strong sense of confidence, a strong sense of purpose. And I said, I want to make better choices. You know, I want to be, people started looking up to me. My teachers in high school would invite me to speak to other peers of mine. And I felt like, wow, like this is beautiful. Like I'm just learning this and they're open to it and they're nurturing what I'm doing. So I just felt like, you know what, I need to take myself seriously. I need to make better choices. Like I'm representing a group of people that I want to empower. So it's vital. I think, you know, it has a lot to do with, and then also too, when you're talking about injustice, you personalize it. I did, right? I was like, how am I going to fight for my people if
Mm.
I can't stand up in my own family to the injustices that I'm going through as a teenager with the machismo and the sexism? And so it really merged, right? Like my philosophy of the world that I was learning, and then seeing the injustice in my own personal life, it strengthened me to have that courage to speak out, not just against the lies in the US history textbook, but also, you know, the taboo stuff in my family where I felt like I cannot be silent about what's happening in my life or what's happening in history. Like those worlds, you know, come together.
Yes, yes, and you touched on a lot of really powerful points. So I'm going to go into one of them, and that's about like, you know, the childhood and that aspect, because I can definitely relate. In our last conversation that we had too, it was like, you know, recognizing and going back through history to really know who we were as a people, but then having to try to relay that to family was a whole different type of conversation. So as I shared before, my mom is Mexican or Nahua descent, and I didn't know that initially until years and years later. But I first really started getting, I don't know, an intuition about it, and I started doing my own research like in elementary school, and I think it was like middle school when I really started like learning about it. And I was like, this is actually really crazy. Like going, you know, back and then seeing all the different levels of genocide, and I'm African American on one side, so genocide on that side, and then like learning the true genocide on the other side and the white supremacy on both sides, and understanding like how my parents and how my mother in particular, you know, treated me and was really her own coping mechanism through white supremacy that was then, you know, forced down her throat, in the way that she grew and learned how to behave in the world, just even to cope. So I'm curious too, like with you and in your childhood, at what point were you able to, you know, start really recognizing that, wait, I'm not really like Mexican, you know, I'm indigenous. And
Mhm.
how was that for you, like that transformation in knowing yourself?
Well, you know what? Growing up, I don't know, you know, you had a similar experience, but my mom, this happens a lot. It could be, you know, the poverty levels, but she would talk about white people oh, you know, like there's white people, behave, there's white people, you know, like it was weird. Like she had this inferiority complex about white people. And when she would tell me who I was, she was like, you're American, you know, she's like, you're American, you know. So I was very conflicted, and I was like, wait, but she views white people this way, and then she calls white people American, which I'm not sure, this happens a lot in our communities where, you know, our parents, they don't say white people, they say American, like that's their code for white, you know.
Right. Right.
And so I'm like, wait, what? Like, and you know, learning history and then getting to high school and then looking at history textbooks, and I'm like, wait, I look more like the one page on the Aztecs that they have on here
Right.
on, you know, all these white women, right? And so I was very lucky that in the 9th, 10th grade, I learned about my history. And at first, I'm not gonna lie to you, like I was very like, you know, I'm very critical about everything. I'm like, what? I couldn't believe that. I was like, wait, you're saying that 95% of our population was wiped out and that we're not Hispanic or Latino. And I was like, I still have that diary, right, that I wrote when I read that. And I was like, it hurt. It hurt. It felt like, wait, why doesn't my mom know this? Why didn't my grandma tell me this? You know, like it felt like the secret was unveiled and I had been lied to, right? And so at first I was mad at my family. And then I asked my family and they're like, we didn't know that. Like, where are you coming up with this? And then I learned that the Mexican government is not even governed by Mexicans. It's still the white elite, right, that never left.
Wow, I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah, like it's intact, right? Like I'm like, what? And then the education system in Mexico is still approved by the Spanish Institute of Education, something like that.
Wow.
So it makes sense why they don't know this, because it's not cool to be indigenous in Mexico, right? It's something that they're trying to distance themselves, and it's
Oh, man.
continuing that process of genocide. And so then as I got older, I started like telling my family about it. I changed my name when I was 19 years old with my financial aid check. Thank you, financial aid. I
Shout
was like, I was like, wait, I'm not these names. I'm not this religion. I'm not this false sense of whiteness. Like, and it was like I remember feeling really physically, like, I don't know, it felt physical, like the detox, the questioning, it was very painful. But I went through this thing too, where I was very dogmatic. I'm not gonna lie, like I was just like, screw everyone. If you're not, like I'm learning this and you're not learning this. And it was just crazy. It was a lot for me to handle. But with family, and I'm glad you have that understanding with your mom, because it's been really embedded, right, in how they view themselves and how they view other people. And that goes into many decisions, right, into a lot of harmful, confidence and low self-esteem. And it's very intergenerational. It causes generational trauma. And the more we have these conversations, I think the more we're going to heal. And now that I'm older, I'm a lot more compassionate. I'm a lot more gentle with how I approach my family, because now I understand just how deeply rooted self-hate is, colorism. And like with my own grandmother, like before she passed, I'm very grateful that I had beautiful conversations with her that were honest, right? I had honest conversations with her about race, about why she would tell me as a little girl to marry white,
Right.
to improve the race. And this is very common, right? I don't know if you've heard that, but mejorar la raza, better the race. And I'm like, wow, like this is language from the 1800s. Like, how is my grandma, we're sitting in Compton on the porch and she's over here telling me, like dating advice, like Mary White. And so as as I got older, I would ask her grandma, like, why do you say those things? Or like, who told you that when you were growing up? And so, and I was very grateful that she shared with me, that that's how she grew up, that's what they would tell her. um and so it's also that, right, like her generation and my generation, and how do we heal, what happened in between, all this time. But I'm very grateful, like I said, that I've had that blessing really to sit with her and be very candid, but with love and compassion, and ask her truth, right? Because even in our community, we're not supposed to talk about bad things. We're not supposed to talk about, you know, race. Like it's a very, I would say, like euphemized racism and colorism, but it's real. And I think the older I've gotten, I think I'm a lot more gentle. I think I'm a lot more compassionate, only because I understand the pain that comes with our associations with race and with white supremacy, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think like you really made me think about like when I first really started learning about it and like going deeper, right? Because it's like a rabbit hole. Like first you learn something and then it just gets like deeper. You're like, no. And it still goes on and you're like, oh
Yep.
my God. I mean, even to this day, I'm still, always learning, always growing and learning something new. And it's just like, yeah, a lot of emotions come up with it. And it's because of, that it's connected to who you are as a person, your paradigm, your world, literally shifts. Like it's a different way that you see things, a different way that you internalize like your experiences and things, instead of it being like so personal. I think as you continue to learn the information in the history, you're like, this wasn't even personal. This is actually a whole process. This is actually linked way farther back than what I even could have imagined. And I think like even the relationship that I have with my parents, which is strained currently, I continuously have to now like really try to give grace and really challenge myself to just, you know, it's okay, because at this point in time, they had no idea. It was a completely different time. They didn't really have internet like we have now. And, you know, there are so many other different aspects to when they were growing up than now. Right. And so it's difficult though, I think, and it's still a challenge because it's like, you want them to know all the things that you know and to be aware and to be different and to change even. I mean, it's a lot to ask though, I think, because they've only known their paradigm in their life the way they did, and they feel like they're doing the best that they know how to do. So it's difficult. How do you think, like, from when you were a kid and like the relationship that you have with your parents to now, the relationship that you have with your parents, how do you think that has like evolved or even detracted from really understanding like, oh, this is like our indigenous history?
You know, it's interesting because like with my mom, when I was younger, I didn't have a great relationship with her. You know, there's a lot of things that I did not understand.
Right.
But as I've gotten older, you know, I just started asking her questions, right? Like my mom, she didn't finish education. She came to work in the fields here when she was like 10.
Wow.
So yeah, you know, and that in itself is like, okay, that's one layer of why, you know, this is such a different experience for her. And then just asking her, because I know like I had my great grandparents, they were the first to migrate to Compton,
Mm.
and that's where they established themselves. And I know that they were healers, they were sobadores, right? They worked with healing the body, they did herbs, and I remember like growing up watching it, but not knowing what the heck was happening. Like people would come into their house, lock themselves in a room. I just heard like slaps and yells and like this strong herb sense, you know, this smell of herb.
Yeah.
And so I grew up like, but no one would talk about it. And so as I got older, I started remembering these things. I go, Mom, like, what was that about? Like, and she's like, oh yeah, you know, my grandparents were sobadores, they were healers. I was like, oh my God, like that's huge. I told her that's like ancient knowledge. That I go, did you learn that? Do you remember the remedies? And so I think in asking her her story, like I think it made her more open to understanding where I was coming from, because she started realizing, wow, like there's things I didn't ask, right? And they're already gone, you know? And so it was really interesting how she like, we're building our family tree, right? That's a thing we have going on right now. And I asked her like, when was the last, you know, where was my great grandfather born? And do you remember the last language that was spoken? Because that's the thing, a lot of Mexicans, right? They don't understand that even though we don't speak the language, like an indigenous language, we did speak it a few generations ago, right? And so when you find out what generation was the last to speak it, usually it reflects the policies of Mexico at the time, where they're trying to get rid of indigenous people, they're trying to get rid of indigenous languages. And so a lot of our people, right, because they felt that pressure to be modern and that pressure to become this national white figure of Mexicanness. And I found out that my great grandfather on my grandfather's side, he was the last to speak Nahuatl. And my mom didn't know this. Like, this is, you know, and so it's been interesting because she's like, you know, oh, like it's hitting her, right? Because I think I'm personalizing the story and personalizing our history and seeing it, it's hitting a lot of my family actually, you know, because a lot of us are like, oh, well, we're not Indian, we don't speak that language, we don't do this. And then here I am like, yes, we did, you know, like receipts. um and it's just, it's, you know, it's disrupting a lot of the white supremacist ideas. It's disrupting that self-hate. But I'm really excited that my family, a lot of them are really excited. They're like, what the heck? Like, they didn't know. And I was like, I'm telling you, like, I'm like, I've been telling you guys, like, and so I think now they're like, wow, I think it's more real to them because they can see like our family tree and records, and that shows, hello, bam, indigenous,
Yeah.
So I think that helps a lot. It helps a lot.
Yeah, I think that's really, really empowering. That's so powerful that you all are doing that. I think it's definitely still definitely a challenge still, and it's also a beautiful thing when family is like, yeah, like let's learn, let's grow, let's do this. But I think it also invites, a lot of that when you're saying like disrupting it, and like those limiting factors that come up where it's like, well, no, I'm not really connected to that culture because I'm an American now. I wasn't
Mm.
born there. I didn't speak that language. So actually I'm an American, and I don't really want to have nothing to do with that. And just I've definitely had conversations with people and they've said things like that. What do you say to like that aspect? Like what do you think?
you know I I guess the wisdom that I have now, if people, that's how they respond, and I get this all the time. I'm like, all right, cool. Like, if people want a white world and they want to submit and they don't really care to preserve themselves, and that's on them. To me, it's like, go ahead, but there's a group of us, a lot of us actually,
Yeah.
that do want to celebrate and do want to honor our ancestors and don't want to be erased by these systems of white supremacy. And to me, what I tell them, like, Hispanic means white, Latino means white, American means white. So once you know this information and you still choose, right, to make a conscious decision to do that, then that just shows, right, what type of world you want to live in, what type of world you're going to raise your kids in, and what type of systems you're going to continue to perpetuate.
Mm,
And and that's real, right? Because there are a lot of people like that, like a lot of people, brown, black people, that are pro-Trump supporters,
yep.
um, right? That they're just like, well, it is what it is. I don't care, USA, USA. And I think that just shows the level of pain, the level of the psychological effect of being conditioned, of being, and ultimately it's easier, right? I think at the end of the day, it's easier to go through that narrative of, oh, I'm just American. Oh, I'm just this. Oh, I don't really care. But a lot of people don't realize that it's political, like that's a political decision. It has, repercussions. Um, and a lot of the times, I've met people that were like that before, and I just back off. I'm like, you know what? I wish everyone well. I'm not here to convince people. But years later, bam, they call me or they email me or like, oh my God, my kid, like he was detained, and or oh my God, like my son was beat up by the cops. Or so then it takes something really drastic and really very personal for them to be like, oh shit, I'm not benefiting from this American, illusion and dream. I'm not. And I think I I I don't want to judge them, because I'm just like, I always give people the benefit of the doubt, but I always know that there's space for all of us to grow. Some people don't want to, and that's fine. But when I do get that call, and I do get him, I do get them a lot. I try to be gentle, and I try to say, well, welcome to this world, because this is what we're trying to fight for.
Yeah.
So let's
Definitely.
put in work.
Yeah, and I think that's also the beautiful aspect, right? Like I think initially when you get all that information, it's a lot. It is overwhelming. It is frustrating, and maybe you only want to do it in bite-sized pieces, and you learn a little bit, and you put it down, you marinate on it for a little while. But I challenge you to go and pick it back up. Don't just leave it there. Like it. I think it's beautiful because the effects that it has when you do pick up, and as you know, it literally means that you're destroying the white supremacy narrative and is where I'm looking for bondage that goes on for generations if you choose to continue to perpetuate that information, that false information, and that false narrative. Because after all, as we know, it is his story. So we have to learn about the other sides of the stories. We cannot just accept that. I mean, of course, we all have a choice, so you can do whatever you want. But I think, as far as the positive impact and the lasting impact and lasting change, means that if we truly want a better world, if we truly want our families to, even when it comes down to poverty or the health issues that we have, it's so deep. It's so deep. The spiritual connection. These are all different aspects of our cultures. Whether it is an indigenous culture or African American culture or African culture, diaspora, all over the world. It's really important, I think, to do that work and self-reflect and allow yourself to maybe feel some pain for that moment, that temporary pain, and then move forward and enjoy your life and continue to grow and learn and speak out, because we need more people speaking out. We can't just be quiet over there in the corner whispering things to ourselves and nobody's listening. Like, we have to continue to be change agents, and that's what I'm so excited about, like, this conversation, because that is the work you've been doing for 2+ decades and going so it's amazing. It's so amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you're absolutely right. I think being able to speak out, and like yourself, right? It's like because we're breaking so many webs of lies, of pain, a lot of the times those of us in the forefront, just like in any army, just like in any vanguard, just like in any, you get the worst bruises, the worst cuts, the worst damage, the worst injuries. But I always like to think, historically, right? I'm always like, okay, how is this going to benefit our community? How is this going to benefit the next person that's watching me? And because I am a strong believer in that, I'm a strong believer that I want my little sisters to not have to go through so much crap that I did. And I know that there's people watching, and I know that there's people listening. It just makes me feel like, okay, well, if I have to be that first person that has to get that punch in the face or whatever, like, I'm going to be there, and I'm going to keep going and keep going. Because if we're not there, then people that look like us and see they won't see themselves. And if you don't see yourself fulfilling beautiful success and beautiful moves, then it's really hard for people to imagine themselves.
Yeah.
And one of the most beautiful messages I receive are from teenagers, right? Are from young women of color that see my videos, and they're like, oh man, like, I can see myself doing what you're doing, and I can't wait to be like you. And I'm just like, oh, like, I'm not an elder yet, but to someone I am, And it feels beautiful, because that's exactly why I do what I do, because I know that among all the crap that's online and all the trolls, there's these gems, right? There's these gems that are there, that are watching, and that are imagining themselves doing what you're doing, being who you are. And that's empowering. That's like, it makes everything worth it, right? I get families, like complete families, that tune into my Friday class. A mom with her 2 teenage girls, right? They watch my live course. A dad with his 17-year-old son. Like, I don't take that for granted. I honor that. I think it's beautiful that people are realizing, that they want to learn. They want to learn. They want their kids to learn. Maybe they didn't know it growing up as a parent, but now they want to use that opportunity with their kids. And I think it's beautiful. It's a beautiful family tradition, right? To start.
Yes, it is. And what are some of your, like, favorite parts about being a historian? You just kind of share some of them, of people coming and really finding the information that maybe they didn't even know they needed, and being able to share that with the family. So what are some of your favorite parts about being a historian?
Thank you. I think it's those messages, because like I said, I'm applying to be a history professor, but because of COVID, everything's on hold. but I'm like, you know what? I'm still gonna teach, right? I'm still like, so that's why I started teaching a class on Fridays on YouTube. Crazy, but
Yeah.
I'm doing it, right? I'm doing it. Have a 10-week syllabus. I had my internship. I'm ready,
And
and you know, and I love it because the best thing is, I think when people tell me you're teaching me more than I've ever learned in Chicano studies or in a history class at college, which is exactly what I'm saying. Because to me, yes, I did go to academia. Yes, I got my degrees there, but they didn't provide me the tools that I was using. Like, I got these tools organically. I created them from mud and stones. And so when I got into academia, I already had my little toolkit. And and I just learned how to like write a thesis, right? And but I think that's important for me for them to know that I'm presenting to you not just empirical knowledge, not just research knowledge, but it's this whole approach of viewing our history in a certain way. And I had a bad experience with an elder that I was with for 20 years. And that person was very controlling, was very he gaslighted me a lot. Told me, not to share all my information with the people because the people weren't ready. Very elitist, right? So I was under his teachings for a long time. And when I left him, it was because it was too toxic, a lot of machismo, um, a
yes.
lot of, emotional abuse. So when I left that, I said, I need to be who I've always wanted to be, who I've been limited to be, who I've been told not to be. And the first thing I did was I started sharing all types of research that I had been doing, And to me, I don't believe in elitism. I don't believe in, that only if you go to college, this information. And so the most fulfilling thing is getting these messages, and I screenshot them, and I have my little tool. And then on my course on YouTube, I created a Google form for every lesson, and I asked students to fill out the Google form, tell me like what they learned, what they want to learn more of, what they like. And people really fill it out, and I'm really excited because I'm like, people are taking the time, like they're writing really, in-depth answers. And it's beautiful to hear them. Like, I have elders on there, I have like a 13-year-old on there, and they're just like, oh my God, like, I never knew this, like, thank you so much, I have so much to read. That to me is so satisfying. And because I put a lot of work into every slide. I don't know if you've seen them, but I have sources and images and like, to me it's like transparency in your research. And and I'm saying I'm not perfect, the research is not perfect, but this is what I'm coming up to. That's what, like, my favorite quote is, when you know better, you do better, right? And so so to me, it's like, this is what I know, this is what I'm presenting, and when I know better, I'll present you something better. But for now,
Right.
right, this is in the kitchen, this is what I cooked, and once I know how to cook better, I'll cook you a better meal. But hey,
Right. No, you know what? We need more people that are giving us the truth, right? Like, I think that for me, that's one of the reasons why I had to step back from like university, because literally I would be sitting in class, whether it was world history class or physics class, any class really. It ended up coming up, whether it was like, oh, this person invented this and blah blah. And when you know the information, that a white person did not create this situation,
Mhm,
didn't invent this situation, an indigenous person or African person
mhm,
did it. It's frustrating to sit there and hear and see that this person is quote unquote the professional and has all this information that's not even true.
yep,
And there's a conflicting situation because you want to stand up and say this is all some BS,
uh-huh,
and what really happened is this and this and this. But then it's there's so many reasons why you can't do that. So I think it's so important that we have more historians and scientists and political advisors and financial advisors that are really giving it to us straight, like the straight information. So that way we can actually connect the pieces together. Otherwise, we just have this one puzzle piece and
mhm.
another puzzle piece, and the rest is we don't know. Like it,
Yep.
try to put those two together and make it work, but it's literally like a 1,000-piece puzzle, and we only have two. Like
Yep.
it's frustrating. So I think it's amazing. That is one of the game changers I think that you're really creating in this lifetime, and for the lifetime ripple effect that you're creating in so many people's lives, which is sharing the truth, sharing what you know, and the actual resources behind where you got the information, which is
Yep.
super important too. And so, who are some of your inspirations, like in Indigenous history and activism?
Whew. And man, on my Instagram, I created this. Okay, so I always, to me, growing up, I knew about Malcolm X before I knew about Emiliano Zapata.
Yes, yes.
I knew about the Black Panther movement. I did before the Chicano movement. So I am very, very honored and inspired by Black poets, by Black movements. And that's just real because, my 7th grade English teacher, Mrs. Roberts, okay, Black, powerful teacher. She introduced me to poetry. We had a poetry reading in the class. And she introduced me to poetry from the Beat Generation, to Nina Simone, and it was stuff that I wasn't finding. I didn't have access to. It wasn't being presented in my community. And so that's what really influenced me. At the very beginning, I was like 13, 14, right? Reading autobiography of Malcolm X. And then finding these artists too. And then growing up, following the work of Ida B. Wells. Like I was very influenced by these very vocal,
Wow.
very unapologetic thinkers and poets. And then Indigenous scholars. There's a Hawaiian woman, her name is Hanani K. Trask.
Wow.
And she I'm not sure she's retired already, but she teaches at the University of Hawaii. And when I learned about her, because I hadn't seen a brown woman like close to the indigenous communities as her, like she's brutal. Like she's like, she would do protests about tourism in Hawaii, saying like haole, like white people leave our land, And she was an academic, and she was writing poetry books, and she was writing history books. So to me, to see another brown woman like taking up space in academia and not watering herself down, I was like, oh my goodness. Like I went to her poetry readings. I met her like twice or 3 times. And so then moving on to that, and then thinkers like, oh my goodness, my mind escapes me right now. Well, that's when Hanani K. Trask, George Yancey it's a late one. George Yancey is a Black philosopher at I think it's Emeritus College. Amazing. He is amazing. I came across him about 5 years ago. I was taking a Pan-African Studies class. Shout out to Pan-African Studies, Cal City LA. It was amazing. Like the way, we could talk about race in these spaces and not whisper if white students are there, not having to shield ourselves or code anything. I think leads a big way. Historian, what's his name right now? Federico Navarrete. He's a Mexican historian from Mexico City.
Wow.
Real Mexican. And he's doing work about deciphering how the Mexican government has repressed the indigenous population in numbers to make it seem that there's a lot less of us than we are. And his work, he works with like indigenous communities. He does like indigenous language community conferences. So, even if you speak Spanish or English, that's no longer the dominant language in those spaces. Like you need to get a translator, and there's just so much. Like I think and like you're saying, I grab from people that are life-giving, that are living their life in their truth and in their purpose, because not a lot of people do. Right? Not a lot of people do because of taboo, or what are they going to say, or oh my God, like the people that live unapologetically and that have found a way to be successful within that world, to me is so inspiring. And like the historian that I use for my work, her name is Marisa Fuentes. She's a Black historian who talked about this enslavement of Black women at the hands of white women.
Mm.
And her work, she's the first historian, a woman of color, or anybody really, that talked about white supremacy in the context of a history book, right? And a lot of historians are afraid of that. They don't talk about that. So when I read her work, right, talking about how the only way she learns of Black women is because of the screams of the archive, or how her body was violated, or how she was described in a runaway slave, ad, like stuff like that really nourished me and saying, wow, if she can speak like this and then she can connect with the subject, I can too, right? And because that's what she says. She's like, and this is in her conclusion, she says, as historians, we're taught to disconnect ourselves from the subjects. We're
Wow.
taught to be objective learners, right? And in her book, I think what spoke to me was the fact that she said, I am writing a history about my ancestors. It was painful, it was personal, and something about like not apologizing for that. And that was big, because as a historian in academia, you are told, oh, right, in third person, don't include yourself in the narrative, right? That's what they do.
Oh,
And with her, I was like, oh heck no. Like, I'm gonna do it too,
yeah.
and so to see these people fulfilling these beautiful projects, like I said, representation is power, makes me feel like, okay, what do I got to contribute, right? Like, what am I going to leave behind, and how am I going to empower another person that's coming into, their realization or understanding their world. And so those are some of the people that are really, motivating, inspiring. And I'm just like, and then people too, like even like self-help people like Lisa Nichols or Brene Brown. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm like pulling from everywhere. I could be listening to a history talk or Lisa Nichols on releasing by, relationships. Like, I just feel like there's so many gifts out there that people have for us, and we just gotta know how to get to them and appreciate them, and they're going to help us, right? Because it's all connected, positive thinking, you know dismantling white supremacy and celebrating who we are. Like, a lot of people disconnect them, right? And they don't see how they're all aligned. And I think to be healthy and to thrive, we really do have to merge all of those things, right? It's how we're going to survive everything that's happening.
Yeah, and I think that all comes back down to the white supremacist view of things, of separating yourself
Yep.
from other aspects. And like when you were talking about the history and how you have to, like, you're taught to do that, I just was like, wow, because it makes a lot of sense as far as like the white historians that have been, teaching me, that I've come across, and just the way that they talk about things is very like us versus them, but also us versus them, and them always is lower than us, and that aspect I think shows up in so many different ways, including the separation, the mental and physical and spiritual separation of things. So like you said, having a more holistic approach. And that's also what's embedded in our cultures. If we continue to look and self-reflect, we will find in history and in culture that our people really did more of a holistic approach to things. It wasn't this thing over here, this thing over there, or you versus me. It was very much a collective and harmonizing experience. So what do you say? Because we are like, I think, I've done a whole lot of research. You've done a whole lot of research, obviously, and you're like continuously learning and growing and putting stuff out there. But there's people, out there that are going to see this and going to come across your page, and they are just really starting out. And I'm sure you've come across a lot of these people. So what do you say to, for the word of advice for specifically the Mexicans that are really indigenous people that have no idea that they are indigenous and have no idea that they're currently under white supremacy brainwashing? How can they really get started in learning about that? And maybe they're even understand like, what, I'm not Mexican, maybe I'm not Mexican. So like what? So what do you really, say to them? What is some word of advice?
Well, first and foremost, I always tell people to be very, very compassionate towards yourself. You know, a lot of the times we want to find out exactly what tribe we come from, exactly what nation we come from, and and we have to understand, right? We have to understand that because of the system of genocide and white supremacy, a lot of those lineages were disrupted. So they're not easily found, right? Because they're purposely destroyed and they were purposely manipulated and cut off so that we don't continue being who we are. So I think first and foremost, just realizing, okay, I'm not white. Okay, like,
Right, don't check
just,
that off. Don't check that off.
yeah. So just realizing, okay, let's start there, right? We're not white. Okay, cool. All right. Next thing, I think, it's to find what you're interested in, right? Like, there's people that are interested in medicine. There's a lot of beautiful books on decolonizing medicine and like Aztec medicine and indigenous medicine. I like to tell people to read things that are like a general kind of a panoramic view of history, like accomplishments. It's called American Indian Contributions to the World. It's a small encyclopedia book on Native contributions to the world. Books like American Holocaust, which is very, very traumatic and very triggering. So I do like to tell people, be careful. But most importantly, like, I think that's why I create the content I create, because I'm always remembering myself, right? Like, how would I have liked someone to present this to me when I was starting out? What would have helped me understand this and at an easier way, right? Because like I shared, the way I was introduced this was a very elitist, a very controlling, a very, misogynistic way. And so I had to find myself in that whole purpose and that whole, process. And that's why I always welcome people to check out. I have over 100 videos on my YouTube. I have a poetry book. My Decolonize courses, they start from, it's 10 courses. So if you start at 1, I try to give a very general view of world history and where indigenous people fit in that model. And then I take it on, right? Like the genocide, the accomplishments, the hidden history of Mexico, so I always try to find a way that introduces people to this with sources, obviously, but also, I think you're right. I think it's about, and that's what helps me. It's like, okay, like sometimes I get caught up, oh, I'm not explaining this, or I should get into this. I'm like, wait. You got to remember, there's millions of people that have no idea what about this history. There's millions of people that are waking up right now that are thinking, oh, I'm illegal on this land. Oh, I must be white because I don't speak a native language. And so I always try to remember that. I remember my own ignorance. I remember I'm still ignorant. I remember what can I do to help facilitate, right, this process. But most importantly, I tell people, be gentle with yourself, be compassionate with yourself, love yourself, and understand that to decolonize is to heal. And I think if we take that approach to what we mean as decolonizing, I think it adds a different approach, right? It's more healing, it's more soothing, and it's much more nurturing than if we just go on to a different approach, right? The militarized or militant, and there's a place for everything, I think. But I think the most healthy way to start your process is to think of it as healing and detox, right? It's like we're detoxing. And if people that, I don't know, they're familiar with detox, or they have relatives that have gone through rehab, or, it's a very similar process, right? We first have to acknowledge that we've been colonized. We have to acknowledge that there's been damage done. And it's like, okay, what do? We got to stay away. We need to, think about things. We need to dig deeper. We need to reach out for people that are supportive. It's real, it's real. But most importantly, I'm happy when people start, so I'm excited to hear people say, oh, I just came across this, or I'm just learning this. Like, to me, I'm like, yes, like that's another person waking up. That's another generation that's gonna disrupt, and it's going to, celebrate and really reclaim our lives. I think it's really exciting, and not to lose that love, and not to lose that focus of positivity. I think is really, really important.
Yes, Definitely, definitely. Thank you so much for that. And really, lastly, what I really wanted to touch on is we're making history right now, right? So, with how everything is going on with the pandemic, with the Black Lives Matter movement, and who knows what's about to come after that. So, before we really hopped on here, we talked a little bit about how, our brown brothers and sisters also supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, right? So, what are some ways that our fellow Indigenous and Mexican brothers and sisters can support this movement?
I think the most important thing, I think, as brown folks, Mexican folks, is for us to listen, is to us to share pages by Black activists, and to show up, and not to, I think what's really important is to show up and ask what needs to get done. Ask, how can I help? Don't take it upon yourself. Don't, derail from the purpose of the protest or whatever is happening.
Right.
I think the most important thing that we can do is say, I'm here, you know, how can I help? How can I be of service? Like, we're not, and I think that's important because a lot of the times I think people don't do that, right? They get excited and they just want to call their own things, and but it's like there's been people doing the work. Like Dr. Melina, I know her from Cal State LA. Like, she has been on the front lines for a long, long time, right? Even before Black Lives Matter, she's been on the front line. So to me, it's, we need to honor those who have been doing the work, amplify their voices, share their actions, try to show up as many as you can. But I think most importantly, and stop judging. We need to stop judging like how Black people feel or react and protest. That's not our role. I think it's very detrimental, it's very demoralizing to hear other people say, oh, well, they shouldn't be doing this and they shouldn't be doing that. And most importantly, I think we have a personal responsibility to confronting anti-Blackness in our communities. I think that's number one. I mean, yes, we can go to actions, yes, sharing, but it's more important to really challenge your own anti-Blackness, the anti-Blackness of your mom, of your neighbor, of your boss. That's where real confrontations and real challenges begin. And that's why I always talk about that. And not even before Black Lives Matter, people that know me, they know I've been talking about this,
Right.
because I just feel like it needs to be said. It needs to be said. And I've always tried to contribute and amplify the challenges because we're so connected. And I think a lot of people say, oh, well, what about all lives and brown lives and Mexican lives? And I get it. Like, I understand where they're coming from. But to me, it's like we can't be co-opting a movement that's been doing the work, right? We have to be respectful. We have to give them credit and come up with other ideas and other concepts, and also being for Black Lives Matter does not take away from being for your own community and supporting your issues. And I think a lot of people get caught up in that, right? I have this problem all the time where it's like, well, what about this? I post something for Black Lives Matter, but what about our own people? I'm like, have you been seeing the 23 years of work I've been doing? Like, like posting about Black Lives Matter and focusing the attention right now on Black Lives Matter and making sure that there's justice for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and everyone else does not take away from the work that we're doing in our own communities. This is how we strengthen each other, right? And I think people don't see that. And that could be because of anti-Blackness. It could be because they're new to this and don't understand how the dynamics of social movements work. But I think that's what we can do. We can start with challenging our own anti-Blackness, teaching our kids about what's happening, the truthful aspect of what's happening. Because like I made a video recently, like when the 1992 uprisings happened in LA, I was 9 years old, right? My mom couldn't explain to me what was happening. My neighbors couldn't explain to me what was happening. So I grew up with a very traumatic view of what happened in 1992. And it wasn't until my later years that someone was able to sit down, explain it to me, And that really changed the way I remember, those things. And I think right now for our kids, we have to be courageous and we have to tell them what's happening
Yeah.
and why, people are protesting, because how they are interpreted and how they're told and explained what's happening is going to impact the way they interact with race issues, with Black lives, with their own positions of power, right?
Yeah.
And these are the moments, right? We have to have these conversations. I mean, goodness, if Sesame Street can do a whole episode on Black Lives Matter, like, we could do this. You get me? We could do this. And but I think, I think that's how we as Indigenous folks, Afro-Indigenous folks, Mexican folks can really do this, is listen, learn, amplify Black voices, and not judge and not co-opt, right? What about us type of thing, because we sound just like all lives matter when we say that, and that's detrimental. It's toxic.
It is. All lives do matter, but we're focusing on the Black ones right now, and I think a lot of people of African descent and that qualify under the Black diaspora, like, we show up for a lot of these other issues.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just asking for that support back in other areas. And because I do have that issue, with my Mexican, Nahua side of my family, where they're just really not really for it. They call me, I think I told you, they call me like Malcolm X Jr., even though I'm female. And I'm just like, you guys don't even see how that's problematic in itself. But, you can only do what you can, and you have to see what you can do. And part of that, I think, is definitely not pointing the finger and also bringing up, oh, what about Black on Black crime?
Oh. Oh.
So we just really have to, be mindful of what exactly is our message that we're trying to convey. What are we trying to take away from something, and why is that? And like you said, challenging your own bias, and that's definitely part of the work.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think there's a lot to be said. Like I said, at these times, there's a lot to be said. And the people that I hear say, oh, they weren't there at the detention and they weren't there. And honestly, I always say, if you've been doing the work, you've seen our Black family show up. People that have not been doing the work that's how they're reacting to this, right? Like, I've been doing the work. I've always seen our Black brothers and sisters show up. So to the new people that are like trying to use that in defense, it's people that have no experience, that have not put in work, that have not been on the front line. So to me, it shows, right? It's revealing. It's like your anti-Blackness is showing. What have you done prior to Black Lives Matter to empower the Brown and Mexican community? I haven't seen you, right? We've been doing the work. And so I think it comes from a very ignorant perspective, but I always say that, like, we've been doing the work, and where have you been is the real, I haven't seen you. It's real.
Exactly. Well, wow, thank you so much for joining me today. And I know this definitely won't be the last time. I have been tuning in, when I can, to your colonize courses on YouTube, Mexican Excellence. And, with my husband, I've definitely been enjoying it. Do you plan on making any more? I think I saw like that it ended, or
we're on lesson 7 tomorrow. It's lesson 7, so I got 3 more to go.
Okay.
Yeah, 3 more to go. After this, I think I'm gonna leave it on there on YouTube as a free resource, but I do want to move on to do more things. Like, I definitely want to invite you on my YouTube channel. I definitely want to amplify more voices. I want to interview. I met a sister that her husband's detained at the Adelanto Detention Center, and he's been there for 10 months. So I would like to speak with her. You get me? Like, use my platform to amplify those struggles as well.
Right.
But I think I'm gonna do Decolonize maybe once a month after the 10-week. It's a lot.
Yeah. So much information. It's so good and rich information. Like, you can't really just find, Googling. Like, so I just really appreciate all of that work. Like, you can really tell, like, you're passionate about it. You can tell that, like, it's true also, you know, because you go back to the source and you're like, this is where I got this from, and this is,
Receipts, receipts, receipts.
yeah. Yeah. How can we reach you outside of this?
Thank you. I have Mexican Excellence on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram. What else? I think that's where I have my work. I'm working on on my second poetry book. I should
Ooh,
release it by the end of this year, I'm hoping.
yeah.
Um, so we'll see how that goes. But definitely, I'm always available to speak to youth, do poetry readings. Right now through Zoom, I'm definitely available for that. But yeah, you can find me Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Mexican Excellence, and that's where I am. I'm always trying to create and build and explain things to people, but also share information on actions, donations, things that I think are relevant to our people. So, and Angela, thank you again. Since you reached out to me, the fact that you reached out and you wanted to talk over the phone to me was like, okay, she means business. This is going to be a real human connection. You
Yeah.
get me? So I appreciate you for doing that. I appreciate you for creating this platform. This is also part of the resistance. This is also part of how we're nurturing and building these spaces to provide healing, to provide direction and guidance, and for your work as well. So I wanted to say, I honor and acknowledge you. And I'm very grateful that I know you and that we're going to continue working together. And I can't wait to have you on my YouTube channel and sharing your perspectives and your experience. So
Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you. And I'm really excited as well to continue to disrupt and continue to challenge those narratives. And with that, for all the other information, I will have it in the description below. And yeah, peace.